Hello, welcome to the studies on poetical books. In this first class, we will be looking the introduction of poetical books. When we talk about the poetical books, which are the books called as poetical books? We know that the five books coming after the book of Esther is called as the poetical books. That means book of Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes and Song of Songs is generally called as poetical books. But in the Catholic circle, they have two more books. In the Catholic Bible, they added the book of Wisdom and the book of Sirach, also called as the poetical books. So here we have to ask a question, what poetical means? Why it is called as poetical books? We have to understand that any literature can be divided into two, that is prose and poetry. Prose means it is direct speech, means we can understand the direct language. Its meaning is just as we read. But poetry is not like that. It will have imaginative usages, sensitively emotional style of expressions, figure of speeches will be there. So it is not a direct kind of speech, its inner meaning we have to take. This kind of literature is called as poetry. So this kind of books in Bible generally we call as poetical books. When we talk about the Old Testament poetical book, the boundaries of poetical literature are not easy to set the limit of, since little is known about the exact nature of biblical Hebrew poetry. We actually still don't know what is the exact limit and what is the exact boundary of the Hebrew poetry, because we are very much away from the original writer and the original audience. Unlike its classical modern counterparts, ancient Hebrew poetry has no distinctive scheme or accentuation, meter, rhymes, or to differentiate it from the prose. Actually, it is very hard for us in this 20th century or 21st century to understand which are the portions is exactly poetical and which are the sections is exactly prose, because we don't know which are the figure of speech they used in the Old Testament time, in the Hebrew poetic time, and we are not having any documents to exactly clearly understand its meaning. Another thing is that only within last 2 centuries the real kind of studies on poetical books have done. That means till 18th century there were not much studies done in that field, because people viewed these books as just theological in nature, or they just wanted to understand the theology of the poetical books. They don't wanted to understand, or they don't want to view it as a literary piece or a poetical piece. They just wanted to understand the theological meaning behind it, so that they didn't go in deep in the studies of Hebrew literature and poetry. So that is how even now, if you go to a library, we will have very less books comparatively with other sections of book in the library regarding the poetical books. You will have more books on the field of prophetical literature or Pentateuch or New Testament studies. You will get chunks of books, thousands of books you will get. But if you go to the section of poetical books, you will get very few books, and among these books, only very few books you can use it as an for the purpose of academic purpose, because very less studies even now is done in this field. The most significant early contribution to the study of Hebrew poetry was made by Bishop Robert Loth in the midst of 18th century. Actually, we are getting a true studies actually from 18th century. It is started with a person called as Bishop Robert Loth. In his studies, he noted that parallelism, counterbalancing ideas in phrases as a fundamental feature distinguishing Hebrew poetry from the prose. When Bishop Robert Loth started to study, he understood that some pieces of literature has more parallelism and counterbalancing ideas. What is counterbalancing means? There's kind of a balancing. If you take a poetry, it will have a balancing. Like if you take a nursery rhyme, twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. So these two lines have a balancing of rhyming words. This kind of balancing ideas he noted in the poetical sections. His explanation of the various type of parallelism remains the basic to the understanding of Old Testament poetic structure. In the 18th century, when Bishop Robert Lowth started to study, that gives us the fundamental understanding, the first kind of understanding in the exact nature of Hebrew poetic literature. Later scholars developed different methods based on the markers in Hebrew in order to identify the Hebrew poetry from the prose. Later, some other scholars developed these kind of ideas, especially using the markers. If you study Hebrew language, you know that we can understand that there are many kind of markers in order to understand stress and different kind of that we will understand when we study the language in deep. So this kind of markers gives us a clue which are the sections are poetical and which are the sections are is prose in content. Later, F.I. Anderson and David N. Friedman refined this approach for separating Hebrew poetry from prose through a prose article counting method that takes into an account additional markers of narrative style in Hebrew Bible. Later, Mr. F.I. Anderson and David N. Friedman, they developed an idea called as counting the prose particle. That is also a usages in the Hebrew language. Uh, Counting that prose particle, they started to understand which are the section is poetical, which are the section is prose in content. Old Testament text exhibiting prose particle densities of 15% or more are considered as prose in nature. So, according to their studies, if a section of a literature in Old Testament is having prose particle more than 15 percentage, they consider it as prose in nature, while those demonstrating prose particle densities of 5% or less are regarded as poetry. If a section of literature in Old Testament having prose particle less than 5 percentage, they considered it as poetical in nature. Old Testament prophetic literature yielding density between 5 and 15% is labeled as oracular prose or connotating its poetical tendencies. That means if you this is talking about prose sections like historical sections, historical books sections, and the poetical book section. At the same time, Old Testament prophetic literature yielding densities between 5 and 15 percentage is labeled oracular prose, connoting its prophetic tendencies. That means when you take the prophetical books of Old Testament, the density of prose particle is between 5 percentage and 15 percentage. We already told that poetical books will have prose particle less than 5 percentage, and the prose sections will have prose particles more than 15 percentage. But in the case of prophetical literature, the prose particles are between 5 percentage to 15 percentage. So what that means? That means that they have tendency towards poetical the poetry. That means they regularly they labeled as prose sections. That means you can understand its meaning as it is. But some parts which having less prose particle, they have a tendency towards poetic. That's why when you read some of the prophetical book of Daniel or Ezekiel, some sections are is like a poetry. We have to understand its meaning not as a not as the like you understand the prose section. That means there you should not take the direct meaning. There you should have to understand it as a poetry, and you have to use understand what is the implied meaning behind meaning, what is the analogies used there, what is the figure of speech used there. Only after referring to that one, we have to go to the meaning of that passage. So this is the idea about the prophetical literature. The most recent development in the study of Old Testament poetry is the application of modern linguistics terminology and methodology to the Hebrew text. The modern day development in the area of poetical book study or poetical literature study is the application of modern linguistics. Linguistics is the scientific study of language. The modern day study of the languages, which are the methodology they use to study the modern day language, they started to apply it on the poetical books, and they started to understand the meaning of the poetical books by studying the language itself. So that is the modern day development. Here the assumption is that biblical Hebrew is not unique as a language, and consequently can be best analyzed by the same procedures contemporary linguistic use on the other languages. uh, why they are studying in this way as a language? They are studying the Hebrew literature because it is on an assumption that any language is not an isolated product. That means all languages will have its relationship with the neighboring languages. If it is evolved from a one native origin, or one area will have the similarities in languages. For example, the South Indian languages, we have similarities between Malayalam, Tamil, Kannada, maybe Telugu, and all the neighboring states languages will have some words will be in common, the ideas will be in common, so that both language people can understand up to a limit. So according to this idea, so they are studying the language as a total, by studying the languages of the whole area. Consequently, best analyzed the same procedures contemporary linguistic use of other languages. For example, the Hebrew poetry was present from the dates of 13th century or 12,000 BC. At the same time, the rudiments of Egyptian poetry can be traced to a triumph hymn from Pharaoh dated 3100 BC. So, when we study the history and the archaeology of ancient Near Eastern, the poetry was very much present in ancient Near Eastern from the time onwards 3200 BC. That is from a archaeological record we got from Egyptian palace court, that the rudiments of Egyptian poetry we got. According to this idea, the poetry was present in the ancient Near Eastern from 3200 BC, but the poetry started in among the people of Israel in the Hebrew culture from 12th or 13th century BC. That is very much after the time of Father Abraham. So, when we study a language, we have to study its etymology also. Etymology means we are going tracing back its roots, from where the language came, from where the expression came. Uh, is their poetry is somewhere related to the other language of their neighbors? So they will use similar kind of words. So studying other languages and its words, we are trying to we are trying to understand the meaning of the biblical poetry. We are not taking the element from other language or other culture, but we are studying the other language, and by studying that, we are trying to understand the meaning of Hebrew poetry. So according to this view, we are studying an whole area and its culture and language, and trying to, and using the modern methodology, and trying to understand the meaning of the biblical Hebrew poetry. No doubt, the descriptions and the analytical methods applied to Hebrew poetry will continue to undergo change as modern linguistics and literary research influences the biblical studies. In the upcoming days, there will be drastic changes in this field, because many studies are going on in this field by studying the language, and using the modern methodology and studying the language, and from especially from the archaeological evidences from the other culture, we are cross checking with each other and trying to understand what that actually the phrases, what actually the poetical section means in that culture. So that is the way we are trying to understand the poetry in the modern day. It will have many changes in the upcoming days also. So that is the modern day scenario in this field of biblical Hebrew poetry studies. When we analyze Old Testament, poetry is the one of the major genre of Hebrew Old Testament. The poetry ranges from brief extract to complete composition like songs, hymns, and oracles. Two types of poetic usages are found in the Old Testament. The first group is the small extract or brief extracts like Genesis chapter 4, verse 23, 24, Numbers 21, 18, 1 Samuel 18:7. These are the brief extracts. More than one or two verses will be maximum, the length of this composition will be. So the other kind of usage is the complete composition, like the whole section will be poetic, like songs, hymns, and oracles. We can find in Genesis chapter 49, verse 2 to 27, Exodus 15, verse 1 to 18, 1 Samuel 2, verse 1 to 10. These are the places in which in the Pentateuch and the historical books we can find. When we come to book of Psalms, Proverbs, Song of Songs, and Lamentation, they are completely poetic in nature. Most of the part of book of Job and the portions of Ecclesiastes are poetic, while the prose narrative in the book of Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Judges, and 1st and 2nd Samuel contain substantial poetic sections. In this book, Genesis to Genesis to Deuteronomy, Judges, and 1st and 2nd Samuel, in that historical books, we are finding very limited poetic elements. And in the case of prophetical books, Obadiah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, and Zephaniah are composed completely in an oracular prose. I already told what is oracular prose. That means the density of prose particle is between 5% to 15%. That means they have a tendency towards poetical. They are looking like the prose, but they have poetical section in nature. So we have to understand some of the poetical elements in order to understand those kind of writings. This is true for the major portions of Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, Hosea, Joel, and Amos. These books also having this kind of oracular usage. That means some sections are poetical, but they will be in their outlook, they are prose. In the Old Testament, only Leviticus, Ruth, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Haggai, and Malachi contain little or no poetic material. In these books, Levitical, Ruth, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Haggai, Malachi contains little or no poetic material. There is very little poetic elements are used in these books. So these are the general things we have to understand about the poetry of Old Testament. So when we talk about the poetical books, we are familiar with one more word called as wisdom literature. So these poetical books also called as wisdom literature. Why they are called as wisdom literature? Although the Old Testament wisdom books are usually poetic in form, they are classified as wisdom literature for other reason. So why they are called as wisdom books? Because their content is wisdom in nature. It gives wisdom. That is why they are called as wisdom books. If you are looking its genre or literature, they are poetic in nature. But if you look at its content, it is wisdom in nature. To the Hebrews, wisdom constituted skill in living that combined with the power of observation, capacities of human intellect, and application of knowledge and experience to the daily life. What is wisdom for the people of Israel? To the Hebrew people, wisdom constituted a skill in the daily life, skill of living that combined the power of observation. How they attain this skill? By observation and using their intellectual capacities or rationalities, not only using and applying this knowledge in the daily life, experience that use that ideas in the daily life. So that is The application of their knowledge and rationality is called as wisdom for the people of Israel. Generally, wisdom literature may be didactic or instructional in nature, or argumentative in a reflective or speculative sense. These are generally teachings or instructions. These teachings and instruction actually challenge the people, challenge the readers in order to pursue a good life. Wisdom wanted to teach practical moral principle for a behavior or prompted the reader to rationally investigate the many problems associated with the human existence. This wisdom actually challenged the people to lead a practical moral life, at the same time prompted the reader to rationally investigate themselves, uh, to understand what is their purpose of their life, what is the purpose of their life. So by thinking in that way, they will choose a godly path, all from the viewpoint firmly rooted in the fear of the Lord. So this is the verse which is the foundation stone for all wisdom literature in the Bible. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of the wisdom. So this is one thing different from other wisdom and biblical wisdom. Biblical wisdom is always founded upon the principle, the fear of the Lord. So, which are the wisdom books in the Bible? We know that all the poetical books in our Bible is classified as wisdom books also. The wisdom literature of the Old Testament includes the instructional books of Proverbs and Song of Songs and speculative books of Job and Ecclesiastes, along with select wisdom psalms. Not all psalms are wisdom psalms, only selected psalms like Psalm 137, 49, or 112. These are the psalms generally called as the wisdom psalms. All other books, poetical books like Job, Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, Song of Songs are generally called as wisdom books also. And portions of prophetical books employing wisdom terminology themselves, like Isaiah chapter 40, Amos chapter 3, 5. These are the sections from the prophetical books also having the wisdom in the content, but they are not entirely called as wisdom books, but they have wisdom uh, content also present in these books.